Welcome back, listeners, to the Cricket Matters podcast with me, Josh Kennedy, and my co-host, James Breese. On the show today, we have a former pro who enjoyed a successful career representing England in 2 Test matches in 1998, as well as making his mark with Glamorgan, where he spent 17 seasons. As captain of the club, he led with distinction, scoring over 15,800 runs across 245 first-class matches, with a batting average of just over 40. His remarkable 309 not out against Sussex remains the highest score in Glamorgan's history. His sporting prowess, though, wasn't just limited to cricket. He was also a successful rugby player, showcasing his skills for Lydney RFC over a decade-long career. After retiring from professional cricket, he transitioned into journalism, writing extensively on cricket and rugby for the Sunday Telegraph and now for the Times. It is a pleasure to introduce Stephen James. Stephen, welcome to the Cricket Matters podcast.
Hi. Yeah, there's a problem with that intro, sorry. I think I'm now 4th on the list in terms of the highest score.
What? How dare Wikipedia not be up to date?
It's Sam Northeast, isn't it?
Yeah, so Sam Northeast, who I now coach a bit, actually, has beaten me twice. Oh. And David Lloyd's also beaten me, yeah.
What have they got? What have they beat you by?
So Sam got 400 and 410, I think.
Nice.
And then he got 335 this year, and David Lloyd got 313, I think. Yeah, so I'm just a footnote in history now. The 4th on.
You're just gonna have to pick up a bat and try again, mate. That's all I can say. Go on, crack on.
Also, Wikipedia. Damn Wikipedia. I knew that. I don't know how we didn't pick that up. But anyway, Steve, welcome to the show. Great to have you.
I can't believe Sam Northeast hasn't updated that actually, but I'll tell him when I see him next.
Exactly. Have a go. Tell him have a go. He must rewrite Steve James as an error on Steve's Wikipedia page.
Before we dive into some deep questions with you, Steve, you've been coaching James Breese a little bit, haven't you? How is my boy getting on?
Yeah, it's good. I don't know how many sessions we've done. 4 or 5 sessions, I think. Really, really enjoyable. Hard working, trying to teach an old dog new tricks. So, I'm actually enjoying it. It's slightly different challenge. I don't think I've coached anyone as old as James before, so it's good. I think we'll make some progress anyway. That's all I'll say. I think that's more for James to say than me. But I think if I say head and hands, he'll know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. I know exactly. No, it is. I'm one of those dogged types that just keep on want to work and want to improve. And it has been interesting getting to the basics, right? And Steve has definitely opened up my eyes to a whole lot of things, which hopefully we'll share on the show today. But it's like, I think I don't understand why more older cricketers don't invest in cricket coaching. I don't know, particularly now with cricketers playing longer, and there's obviously 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s age group and stuff like that. But it's, for me, coaching is a big part of everything that we do, from fitness, from training, from everything we do. Investing in yourself is important. I think it's not only an investment in me personally to try and improve, but it's been a massive learning curve for me in terms of my coaching ability too. So it's been enjoyable. And I apologise, Steve, for asking so many questions, but I'm just one of those annoying people.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, it's quite interesting from my point of view. So obviously I had a long career. And while I was playing, I did quite a lot of coaching. I obviously went to Zimbabwe and South Africa for quite a few winters when I was doing a lot of coaching. I think I was a pretty rubbish coach, to be honest, at that stage, because I was just so focused on my own game, and I was basically using the coaching as a means to playing more and practicing more. And then when I finished playing, I coached for a little bit, but then journalism took over. So I think for about probably 10, 12 years, I didn't do any coaching whatsoever. And then I actually lost my job at the Telegraph. And I was invited back to my old school, Monmouth. Andrew Jones there, Alan Jones's son, invited me to do a session or two. And I was so scared when I went back there, because I was sort of quite wary of the game having changed quite a lot. But going back there and doing a couple of sessions, I just sort of got the bug again. And luckily, I actually found another job at the Times like about a month later. But I made a real conscious decision to carry on with the coaching, and it's something I really, really enjoy. Also, I don't want to get too emotional, but obviously, I don't know whether you know, I lost my daughter 4 or 5 years ago. Bethan died so tragically, and And I've found that coaching has been a real sort of help for me since that. Sort of, I find it quite a sort of safe environment, the cricket environment. Socially I do struggle a little bit, but doing the coaching, I do boys and girls. Probably more so the girls' environment as well. I really enjoy coaching with Amy Reese and the other coaches there. So in that respect, coaching has like really helped me. But I think I said to you, James, once, I don't actually really see myself as a coach. I just see myself as a former player, just trying to help other players. That's all that, people talk about coaching philosophies and that sort of stuff, but I haven't got a coaching philosophy. My only philosophy is I want to try and help every individual that I'm coaching. I'm asked to help an individual, and I just try as hard as I can to help that individual with my sort of knowledge and experience over the years. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, and it is. There's a couple of things to unpack there. I think you share like cricket being your safe space. Obviously, you did it for a career for such a long time, batting out in the middle. You batted out in the middle for a long time as well. More longer than most, I think, is the best way to put it. It's talking about how people revert back to their comfort and somewhere they feel a safe space, because it's important, because the mental aspect of cricket is really important. We'll talk about it a bit more later on as well, but it's not just the mental aspect of playing, it's that feeling of inclusion, because it's obviously, you speak to some ex-players and they struggle with the transition from playing to not playing at the pro level, and I know the PCP does a lot of great stuff for that.
I think Andrew Flintoff's a really good example now. So when he finished playing cricket, I think he hated cricket, and he made a real conscious decision to sort of get away from cricket. But this horrific accident that he's had, he's come back to what I think is his safe environment in terms of cricket. He's looked to cricket for something to help him through what he's going through. I actually wrote a column on this a while ago, sort of comparing it to my situation as well. I haven't actually spoken to Freddie about it, but I've spoken to a few people around him, and his situation seems remarkably similar to mine, albeit a lot more high profile and stuff. But I think we sort of both found a safe environment.
Interesting. And then just the other thing you touched on about you trying to help people, you don't see yourself as a coach. What I've discovered, and funnily enough, like in a slightly tangent, I've come back to cricket after some difficult years. Well, Josh, with our old company, Strength Matters, 2015 to 2018. And cricket was my getaway from all the stress that was involved with that during the time. Was, without getting too political, the Brexit impacted our business massively and we almost lost it. And as a result, those 3 years of hard graft where I hardly saw anybody. But cricket was my escapism. So it's funny how you say that for yourself, because I found that myself. And that's probably why I'm going back into it, coaching, and it's kind of my safe space. When you revert back to as a child, almost the fun stuff you wanted to do and you enjoy doing. So it's interesting you talk around that. But then the other thing as well, as I've discovered, is like, there's a lot of coaches, lots of wonderful coaches out there. But we know from whether it's talking about business, whether it's talking about strength training, fitness, the best conversations we learn are from people at the bar, right? When we're at the bar having a drink, where it's away from the coaching setup. And what I'm finding as well is like people like yourself, obviously I talked to Powley recently as well, who you coached and met, you've worked with and played with for many years at Glamorgan as well. You find that what I'm finding is that some of the best information and knowledge that are being passed on are by the ex-pros, not in a coaching sense, but they said they had to figure this stuff out the hard way back in the day. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you onto the show, is because back in the day, in the 80s and 90s, before the professionalism, I think, of cricket and the way coaching went, you had to figure this stuff out the hard way. And sometimes figuring stuff out the hard way is the best way to learn. And some of that is maybe getting lost in translation a little bit now with some modern day coaches, I think. And that's what, from my experience of seeing it. And this is why we're extract from your brain a little bit to understand more about, well, what things do you have to figure out back in the day that can now help other cricketers develop, improve their game?
I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but I think the best coaches in cricket are normally the ones who've had to work hardest and had a lot to work through. I always go back to the example when Viv Richards was playing for Glamorgan. I remember trying to sort of get some info out of him and couldn't really get much out of him. He's just so instinctive, and he sort of couldn't really understand why other people couldn't do what he was doing, But, someone like myself who've had a real up and down career, went through periods where, it looked like I might not have a career, and a lot of people sort of doubted me and didn't really rate me. But as I say, at the time, I don't think I was a very good coach, because I was trying to figure out things for myself. But now, sort of, with the benefit of a lot of time since I finished playing and still watching cricket, I think I've become an okay coach, because I think I understand the game a lot more than I did when I was actually playing, while I was trying to work through it.
I think it's very humble of you saying "okay, coach." There, I think there's one of the things that gravitate to me is that little conversations, but keeping the simple things basic. Like we know in fitness and training and other coaching formats that if you don't master the basics, everything else is just a circus trick. And when we joke, we'll talk about head and hands in a second. But you've brought me right back to the basics of head and hands, where if I don't own those positions, then everything else becomes irrelevant. And anyway, but we'll dive later on.
Yeah, but all I'm trying to do with you is trying to get you to make better contact with the ball more consistent. But going back to your point, I think there are very different types of coaches, and different people suit those roles in different ways. So, a lot of people see a cricket coach as the head person who's up front, talking to the group and like really stressing, big conversations with a group. I'm not particularly comfortable talking to a group, and I've got a big theory about batting that I never like to speak to a group about batting, because I think everyone's individual and everyone will interpret those messages differently. I think that's actually quite dangerous to, when I hear of a coach talking to a group of batters together, I always slightly shy away from that, because I think that can be quite dangerous. As you say, I just remember from my career, all the most important things ever said to me were just, as you say, in one-on-one conversations, and they're what I call the little golden nuggets that you take away, because there's a lot of sort of noise and fluff around coaching sometimes, isn't there? But you need sort of like real specific things that are going to help you. I think that's how the best players progress, because you get a lot of advice, a lot of coaching, don't you? And it's being able to filter that and work out what is best for you. And some things don't work for you. And you see some coaches really trying to impress things on players, and you're looking at it thinking that's actually not going to work for that player. So yeah, as I go back to what I said, I try and get to know the person I'm coaching and try and work out what's best for them. As we joke about with the head and hands, there's some real fundamentals I try with every player, but I recognise that every player is different, and I certainly don't try and encourage anyone to play like me, because I had an awful technique. But
it worked though. It worked over the years.
I wasn't a particularly enjoyable batsman to watch. I don't think. Yeah, I actually enjoy coaching players who are like totally different from me. So, James, we both know someone called Henry Hurl, who's at Cardiff, obviously on the Glamorgan staff, and he was at Monmouth where I coached. Now, if somebody watched me bat and watched Henry bat, we are two like polar opposites. But I actually probably enjoy coaching him more than someone who would be like me, And in terms of watching players, like Josh Butler is my favourite cricketer. If he's batting on TV, I will watch it, whatever competition he's playing in. And again, going back to how I played, that's totally polar opposite. Maybe it's because those people can do things that I couldn't do, and I'm sort of drawn to.
Well, it's true. Like use Henry. Big shout out to Henry, by the way. I'll send him a link to listen to the podcast. But one of the things you notice about Henry, particularly when up close to him in the nets, when he's got Truman on and he's just range hitting or hitting the ball, my God, he hits it hard. You credit where credit. It's unbelievable.
So we used to do sessions in Monmouth, which is quite a small gym, and he'd be hitting ball, and the wall is quite close at the back, and he'd be hitting balls, and they'd be flight. You sort of have to duck when it comes past you, and then duck when it comes back off the wall and stuff. I mean, when he was a young kid, he was already hitting it as hard as any pro. Yeah, amazing talent, and it'll be interesting to see how he progresses.
Yeah, definitely wishing him all the best. I love this tangent already we've got on. Josh, let's dive into the meat and potatoes of this. Let's actually try and extract all this from Steve and like all his philosophies and coaching principles and what also made him a successful batsman too.
We're going to pick your brain. We're going to pick your brain, Steve. I don't know how much James has told you about what we do, how we do things at Cricket Matters, but we have what we like to think is a complete approach to cricket coaching. We look at the physical conditioning, mental and psychological resilience side of the game, as well as, of course, the tactical and technical skills, kind of in that order. How do those elements resonate with you, sort of especially in the context of your own career and experiences as a top order batsman?
Yeah, I mean, fitness was massive for me. Going back to how I played, if you'd see me play, you'd realise I had to be fit and run a lot because I couldn't hit many boundaries. So I had to...
Sounds like me.
I had to run a lot.
All ones and twos.
Yeah,
Steve?
100%. Yeah, 100%. But when I played, so throughout my career, we never had any permanent S&C coaches. So right at the end, we actually had some part-time S&C coaches. Actually, when I was captain, I brought in a guy called Hugh Bevan, who now works for the WRU. But at the time, he was the Ospreys rugby S&C coach. His son, Tom Bevan, actually plays for Glamorgan now, and we were good friends. So he was coming in part-time after he'd done his stuff with the Ospreys to do part-time S&C with us. And we had another S&C guy called Andy Harrison who was working at Sport Wales. I think he went to Sky Cycling. I'm not sure where he is now, but again, he was doing it as part of a project, I think. So it was unpaid. So basically, in those days, we did our own fitness. So I mean, we made so many mistakes, and I probably trained too much, and that's probably why I ended up having 7 operations on the same knee. But for me, the fitness side was as much about sort of mental discipline as physical discipline. I always go back to when I was a youngster. I was coached by a guy called Graham Burgess, ex-Somerset, all around there. He was at Monmouth for most of the time I was there. And his big piece of advice when I became a pro is he said, be first there and last to leave. And that was something I always held true to in terms of this might sound bad, but I always wanted to do more than everyone else in the team because that made me feel good about myself. So that was sort of my preparation. So even if we did some fitness training as a team, I would go off, and even if it was like when no one was watching, you see a lot of people doing training and they want people to see them doing it, but I often think they're the guys who are not actually training that hard. I think the ones who train the hardest are the ones who go off and do it on their own, because that's the hardest time to train, isn't it? When it's just you on your own and your own mind. So that was sort of my philosophy, and that I think that's one of the reasons why I was quite good at getting big scores, because in my mind, I always said to myself, you've trained harder than anybody else, so that means you can get bigger scores than anybody else. I know that's a fairly simple correlation, but that's how my mind was thinking. You know, if I train harder, I'll get bigger scores. Simple as that.
It's interesting though. I remember we spoke about recently, but also, like, I remember reading an article about Michael Clarke, who was struggling to get scores and big scores, and then he changed his approach to batting, where he went in and batted for long sessions in the nets, like 2-3 hours at a time, rest, like a lunch break, come back and do it again, and he kept doing this repeatedly. Now, I'm a big believer. There's your fitness, so you can be fit as you want to. There's also a difference between match fitness. We know that from all sports, but I think there's a big difference in batting fitness, as an example, because I think a lot of people from club cricket, I'm seeing time and time, they're the 20s, 30s, and they're in there for maybe 20, 30 minutes, maybe 45 if they're lucky, but they don't last the whole innings. And that's a lot of the time it's because they're blowing out their arse, if I'm being brutally honest. So there is a difference between batting fitness and physical fitness. But how did you combine the two? What was some of the things, fitness drills that you did, and then combine it with the batting stuff?
Yeah, that's the difficult thing, because it's so hard to replicate what you're going to do, isn't it? And I'll be honest, I didn't do those long net sessions. Some people did. Mike Hussey was another one I heard about. Yeah, he used to bat on the machine for 2 hours, have some food like for lunch, and then go again for 2 hours. Matthew Maynard at Glamorgan would do some really long sessions on the bowling machine. Matthew wouldn't sort of train in the winter till about February, and then he had a coach, a guy called Bill Clutterbuck, who's sadly passed away. But he would come down, and Matthew would do 3-4 hour sessions. I'll be honest, I didn't do that. I'm not sure why, but about an hour was probably enough for me. on the machine. Yeah, going back to your question, I'm not sure how I did sort of translate that fitness to big scores, but what I'll say is this goes back to the whole thing we're talking about, scoring big runs. I was a massive one ball at a time person. I literally couldn't look beyond the next ball. I remember at one stage we used to do quite a lot of goal setting as a team, and they used to talk about individual goals. I really hated that. I couldn't get on board with that at all, but I know some players could. So I know a colleague of mine, Tony Cotti, would actually sit down, look at the fixture list, and he would set himself a target of so many runs per month. But I remember doing one of those sessions, and I know we were playing Warwickshire, the very first game of the season, and I knew that Alan Donald, the great South African fast bowler, was going to be opening the bowling for Warwickshire. So I knew the first ball I was going to be facing that season would be against Alan Donald, and I was thinking, I don't want to get hurt, basically.
I don't blame you.
I want to get past that first ball because, he's one of the quickest bowlers in the world. So, people are talking about goals, and that was my goal, not to get hit the first ball of the season, basically, and try and get off the mark. But that was my philosophy, was literally one ball at a time. Can't look beyond that. You've got to play. They can only bowl one ball at a time. You can only play one ball at a time, and that was literally how I went about things.
Oh no, I remember you saying again, this is just a passing conversation. You used to do a lot of shuttles, and before we dive into the mental side of things a bit more in depth, you spoke about a lot of shuttles. Can you give some examples of the shuttles you did and how you paired it up with some of the batting training you did? Because I think that's a really good tip, I think, for other cricketers to hear.
Yeah, I remember you saying you don't think you should do shuttles in the winter. And I probably didn't do too many shuttles in the winter. But I remember one time doing them. That's actually when my knee first went. I remember being in David Lloyd, actually, on the tennis court trying to do some shuttles. And I went to turn a bit too quickly and jarred my knee. And that's how my problem started. But yeah, so during the season, I had a big thing, and pre-season. If I had a net, I would then do at least 60 shuttles after the net had finished, and I'd keep my gear on, just because I thought that was realistic. So I'd do them in blocks of 20, and I'd do anything between 1 and 5, and then walk 1, and then after a block of 20, walk 2. So if that makes sense. So I'd run a 3, walk 1, run a 2, walk 1, up to 20, walk 2, and then go again. But basically that was, I was trying to make things realistic. It's weird because when you're running in pads and stuff, you can't sprint, can you? So it's almost like you're going to sort of 75%. So people say I was quite quick to the wickets. I don't think I was, just because you can't run flat out. But I think I was quite good at anticipating and taking fielders on, and used to back up quite well as well, So often the best runners between the wickets aren't necessarily the quickest guys, I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, it makes perfect sense. We're a big believer in, I think one of the things we would love to see cricketers do more is proper sprint training, like learn to sprint like a 100-meter sprinter. And the reason that is such an important thing is it's all about running mechanics. Now, I'm not saying cricketers will run like 100 meters in like 10 seconds flat. I'm not saying that, but it teaches better mechanics. But at the same time, then you've got to bring in the reality of training, which is then what bats they're going to be wearing while they're playing.
I think my running style was not particularly good. I used to turn in a bit of a circle, to be honest. But I just, nobody ever coached us on that, so I just sort of found one. One of the big things with batting, the difficulty is you never know when you're going to need your fitness most. In terms of you never know when you're going to make a big score. So my big thing was, if I got a low score, I needed to do some training that day as well. So someone like Matthew Maynard could literally get out and he'd take his pads off and we'd be at Cardiff and he'd put his shorts on and then he'd run down the Taft Trail and do a 5-miler, and that, straight away. I wasn't like that. I'd sulk for quite a few hours before I could do something. But I definitely make sure that later on in the day, I did some shuttles we used to play a lot of touch rugby. So if it had been quite an easy day, we might have quite a vigorous game of touch rugby afterwards. But I think, I'm not sure how it is now, but what I used to see in cricket was that towards the end of my career, fitness obviously became a much bigger thing. So you'd see a lot of people like training like fury during the winter, and you'd have your bleep tests and your strength tests at the start of the season, and then they wouldn't top it up. So basically what happened was that by the end of the season, like everyone's fitness and and weight had gone up massively, and then you've got to start again. So I was always trying and maintain it, but that is difficult because you do play a lot. And as I say, you never know. It's not like Olympic athlete. You know when your meetings are, and everything's built towards that. If only we could know when that 300 is going to come, so we could prepare for it. So you sort of need to be ready for your best performance, like throughout the season. And that's a really difficult thing to manage.
Need to be ready all the time to go, don't you?
That's the hard thing about batting, I reckon. I mean, bowlers know sort of, when they're going to have a fairly hard workload. I mean, depends on the toss, but during, let's say, a 4-day game, they know they're going to have to bowl however many overs it is. But batting, you could get 2 low scores in that game, so you basically haven't really done anything apart from fielding, and you top it up and then get ready for the next one. It's quite difficult, I think.
It is, and I think that just what we're seeing again, and this is common in a lot of sports, that from the start of the season to the end of the season, the fitness levels, even though they're in season and they're match fit, their fitness levels actually drop. And you see body fat percentages in a lot of athletes increase over that time as well, because they're more tired, they need to recover more, they're eating more to compensate for the games and everything here. So they're also, funnily enough, injury rates increase as the seasons go on as well with a lot of sports. So this is what we're trying to educate a lot of cricketers all the time, is that sometimes you can't do more training during the season because your body's actually tired, you need to rest and recover. But then the sensible option is to really dial in the nutrition, the food side of things, because that can help control what is going in your mouth and how much body fat percentage you are doing. And there's ways to manage it. It becomes a more conscious effort though during the season, and to be more mindful. I think it's really important for a lot of cricketers to understand, really.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. So, my diet has never been brilliant. So a lot of my training, I was actually trying to keep weight off as much as actually training for cricket. And the trouble was, sort of back in the day, the food we were given at cricket grounds was terrible, basically. A big 3-course lunch, cheese and biscuits to finish off and stuff, and then sandwiches and cakes at tea time. And then if you were away, you got a meal allowance in the evening, and you go out for a meal and probably have a couple of beers and stuff. It's just, I've always had a sweet tooth, so I'll always be having some chocolate and sweets and stuff. So I think it's a lot better these days, but a lot of my training was to keep weight off as well as actually training for cricket. But as I said at the start, that sort of gave me a good discipline mindset as well. And I probably, I know a lot of people said to me, you train too much, but I would never want to slacken off on that. I wanted to. That was just my mindset. Because as a youngster, I was never particularly naturally fit. Went to university, probably drank too much and put a bit of weight on. And then I can't remember an exact time, but there was a time when I thought, right, I've got to. I'm supposed to be a professional sportsman here. I need to get fitter. And that's sort of when I started. And there were a few other guys in the Glamorgan team. Tony Cotty was one who used to be a professional footballer. And he trained hard as well, so we sort of latched on to each other. And so it's funny, sort of gradually others in the team started joining us, and by the time we became like a championship winning side, most of that side trained really hard. And it was sort of it wasn't a conscious decision by anybody. It was sort of people just sort of latching on. And because I ran really well between the wickets with someone called Adrian Dale, who was a good mate of mine, then everybody else realised they needed to be fitter so they could run better between the wickets. So it just sort of evolved. There was never anybody saying this is what we're going to do. It just sort of happened. So I think that's sort of leadership in a weird kind of way, just by doing and then people following. But that was definitely an environment that sort of evolved at Glamorgan. People used to say that we were fitter than everybody else, and because of that, we were better fielding side than everybody else, and we ran better between the wickets. Those are key points there.
And that's a big thing for us. Is fitness it's the easiest thing I think to fix. It's just changing the approach to how you're doing it. When you talk about technical stuff, it's the hardest thing to change. It takes the longest to make those changes, right? But the physical side of things can make such a difference. Now, here the question for you is: so I see this all the time in club cricketers, how people's games change. So somebody who likes to run between the wickets a lot ends up with somebody who can't run very well. They're just like either block or hit, and they don't want to run. When you were batting with somebody who wasn't as quick as Adrian between the wickets, how does that impact your game?
Yeah, it's frustrating. So I'll be honest. So Hugh Morris, like, great Glamorgan, know me about, great friend of mine. So he initially, when I started opening in one-day cricket with him, he didn't want to run, and that was a bit of a problem. But eventually, he realised how important that was to me, and he got a bit fitter, and we started running. We started to have a good understanding. So going back to Graham Burgess, we actually opened the batting together for our club side, Lydney. And Graham was obviously, he was quite old by then. So, people realised that he wasn't going to run my run, so they'd set fields accordingly, and that becomes frustrating. But in the professional game, my view was there's no excuse for people not running between the wickets. I never said that at a team meeting or anything, but I think people sort of just realised that. And Hugh got himself fitter and, just became a bit more alert and had better intent in running between the wickets. And those sort of things evolved. Matthew Maynard, as I said, used to train quite hard, and he was good as well. And I think we were the best team running between the wickets. And I will say, fielding and running between the wickets are two things that don't actually need much talent. It's just a mindset thing and more training, I think.
Exactly, and it's what we're seeing though. It's the stuff that people are investing the least amount of time in. It's incredible.
They're the easiest things, and if I was ever I won't be, but if I was ever head coach of a team, those would be the two things I'd say. Right, we're gonna nail those two things because they're so easy to fix, I reckon. And then once you start getting those things together, then I reckon a lot of other things would fall into place.
Brilliant. But let's dive into the mindset stuff now. You've touched on it quite a few times, and you said that you were very focused on one ball and should be present for that one ball each and every time. So let's take you back into the days, into your prime, right? And what was your mindset as you were putting in the pads to walking out into the field, face that first ball of the day? What was your mindset? What was going through your head? What was your routine?
This is something I try really impress on the young cricketers I coach. It is really important to have a routine before you go out to bat, and I think you need to try a lot of different things to work out what's best for you. And like routine and superstition, like cross paths quite a lot with cricketers, and that's certainly the case for me. But like, I'll give you an example. You watch Joe Root go out to bat. So he will come out of the pavilion. There'll be a boundary marker. He'll get to that boundary marker. He'll squat down, he'll spring up, and then he'll sprint out halfway out to the middle, and then he'll start doing some shadow batting. He does that every single time. So is that routine or is that superstition? It's probably a bit of both. But in my view, all that is doing, that is telling his mind, right, okay, this is action time. We need to be sharp here, because he's done it so many times. It's like almost his mind is reacting to those movements. So, I was a big one for left hat on first. I had a pretty strict routine of how I got ready. Myself and Hugh Morris would open the batting. He liked to go and sit on the balcony and get used to the light, but for some reason, I had to stay in the changing room. He went out first. I went behind him, and then I had a certain routine of like shadow batting as I went out. I do a lot of running on the spot before I went out, but I can't exactly remember what it was. But I reckon if you persuaded me to play a game, which you never would now, but if you persuaded me to play a game, I reckon I would do that routine without thinking. If that makes sense, because it was some sort of ingrained. But I
just ingrained in you.
Yeah. But I went through a lot of different things before I hit on probably a good season, and then like everything stays the same then. But some people like to relax before they go out to bat, don't they? I mean, Viv Richards used to go to sleep in our dressing room. The 12th man had to wake him up. I mean, I could never do that. But I think there was a picture actually of Marnus Labuschagne asleep on the balcony when Australia were playing India, the World Test Championship final at the Oval. Now that, to me, that was quite surprising, because you think of Marnus as like when he's out in the middle. I mean, he's totally hyper, isn't he? But maybe he does relax a bit more before he goes out, and then once he's once he's out there, then he's really switched on. But yeah, I mean, everyone's different, but I really try and impress on young cricketers. They've got to try and find, then there needs to be a routine in order to get your mind like really sharp when you're going out to the middle. You know, your mind needs to know that this is action time, and you need to be really switched on. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
Yeah. I'm not a psychologist, but I never really spoke to a psychologist about it. Again, it was just something I sort of worked out. I mean, I'm sure we'll come on to concentration, but one of the big things is when I was young, you're always sort of told by coaches you need to concentrate when out in the middle. And I took that to mean all the time you're out in the middle, you've got to be concentrating. So you're not allowed to like slacken off. So when I was young, I'd be trying to concentrate like full on all the time. And I now know that's an absolute disaster because you can't be full on concentrating. And the best phrase I've ever heard about this is Graham Gooch used to talk about turning the volume down. So in between balls and in between overs, you need to turn that volume down. And then when the ball is running in, that's when you need to switch it back up again. You face the ball and then you turn it back down again. So that's something I think we probably don't talk to young cricketers enough about. Again, it's like it's a personal thing, but they need to know sort of what they're actually trying to do there. They can't be like full on concentrating the whole time. Again, does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense because what I'm seeing, and also from my own escapades in club cricket and coming back into playing cricket, people tell you always to concentrate and watch the ball. They don't tell you how. They don't tell you the hows and in between it and what you need to do and like switching off in between balls. So with that in mind, let's go back to Alan Donald's at the top of his mark, right? He's going to bowl in his first ball to you, right? What is your process from him ready to bowl to you being ready at the crease to face that ball and him running in? What was going through your mind? What were you saying to yourself?
So the first thing is I had a weird thing. So I used to put my head down and tap my bat. So I didn't actually watch him for probably more than half his run, mainly because I remember trying to do that. David Sid Lawrence, who's obviously really ill at the moment. He's got MND, isn't he? So I don't know if you remember, he was a big, bustling, fast bowler. And I remember facing him and watching him run in, and he was scaring me. I mean, it's like this big, huge man running in really aggressive at you. So I thought, I'm going to cut half of that bit out because I don't really want to watch that. So I used to tap down. I mean, if bowlers were really clever, there's a lot of bowlers who could have just bowled a ball to me and I wouldn't have even been looking. I don't know whether I'd been given out or not. I remember there was an old left-arm spinner called Norman Gifford at Warwickshire. He used to do that. He used to try and bowl a ball when batters weren't looking. And if bowlers wanted to do that, then they could have easily done that to me. Yeah, so anyway, but going back to your watch the ball thing, you will notice that on TV, you'll see a lot of players mouthing watch the ball to themselves as a bowler's running in. And that I actually started doing that halfway through my career. I think we had a conversation about this, James. It goes back to Adrian Dale, who I mentioned earlier. Once when I was going through a horrendous run, couldn't score a run. He said to me, "You watching the ball? Are you actually watching the ball?" And I sort of dismissively, "Of course I'm watching the ball. You know, there's a bloke running in, I'm watching the ball." But when I went away and thought about it, I'm not sure I was watching the ball. I was looking in the general direction. So I think there's some players who need to really focus on the ball, and there's some players who are just okay looking at the wider sort of focus. And I quickly worked out that I was somebody who really needed that sharp focus on the ball. And I actually discovered that I could see the seam of the ball, and I could actually see how that was coming out, and that would give me clues as to how they were swinging and when spinners were bowling, which way they were trying to turn it. So that became my sort of cue to the brain to switch on, and I might even have the odd F word in there now and again, just when I knew I wasn't sort of as switched on as I might be. So watch the effing ball or whatever it was just coming in. So that was my cue to be what I call fierce focus, and then watch the ball, play it, and then walk away again, turn the volume down, come back, turn my head down, and then look up just as he's coming into his sort of boundary. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. Like I say, that's what we're trying to get out of is like, What was going through your head? And then obviously you repeated this ball after ball after ball, and it developed over time.
The other thing is you need to clear your mind. So, and I think I've said to you, Dave. So when we're working in the nets, you can think about other technical things. We can't think about too many things. Once you get in the middle, you can't be thinking about any technical things. And that's a mistake that we all make. I made loads of time. Thinking about, is my head right? Are my hands right? Where are my feet going? But if you start thinking about that in a game, you're never going to score any runs. You've got to simply think about watching the ball and how you're gonna score the runs. I always say batting is all about making decisions. So they're like conscious decisions, but they're obviously subconscious decisions that you basically react through instinct, don't you? Through all the training you've been doing, because you've got so little time to make that decision what you're going to do, but you need to make a decision whether to go forward, whether to go back, whether you're going to attack, defend. There's so many decisions you've got to make, and a lot of that's got to come down to instinct. But they're also conscious decisions. The field sets, and and you can predetermine some shots, which we obviously see loads of now in T20. I'll be honest, when I was playing against spin, I'd be predetermined a lot of the time. So if I was coming down the wicket, most of the time I'd predetermine that. When I was going to sweep, I'd be predetermining that. And you see a lot of that now. I always say the key is, if you're going to predetermine something, is what is your plan B and C? So you want the ball to be in a certain spot to play a certain shot. But what if it's not? What is your plan B then, Do you just defend it, or have you got another attacking shot to play? And I think that's what separates the best players from the others, how well they sort of adapt. Going back to the decision making, I always say the best batters seem to have the most time, don't they? That's because they're very good at making decisions. So they pick things up, they'll pick length up quicker. So I always say, like, if you go on the bowling machine and you've got a professional batter and, say, a very good under-18 batter, on the machine, when they know where it's going to be, there's probably not that much difference between those two players. But then you put them out in the middle and someone's bowling and they've got to make those decisions, about forward or back. That's when you'll see the golfing class and experience. But if they actually know where the ball's going to be, if they're fairly competent technically, there's probably not that much difference in how they hit the ball. And then that's the key of how they sort of react and make those decisions. Does that make sense?
It's funny. Yeah, makes total sense. And again, it's what you said. It's something that Matt says all the time as well. I asked him the question, I think on one of the Canny's walks, actually. And I asked Matt, out of interest, what separates the best players from the good players and then the rest of the players? He goes, picking line length. They pick it up earlier at the hand earlier than anybody else. That's what he said to me. I
mean, Matt was actually a great example. He picked up line and length so brilliantly. So so when the ball was short, he's a brilliant back foot puncher to the offside, but Matt was a very good puller, but he never hooked. So he could tell the difference between, got used to a pitch, how high a ball was going to bounce. So I basically saw a short ball, and we can come on to this later, but playing the short ball transformed my career. But I'd see a short ball and I was going to have a go at it. So that might be a pull or might be a hook. I wasn't good enough to distinguish between those two lengths, but Matt was. I'll say Matt never really knew how good he was. He could have been. Yeah, he should have been. A top international player. But what did he play? 3 or 4 tests or whatever. But I think it goes back to the mental side. I don't think Matt will mind me saying this. So when I first started playing for Glamorgan, I just used to look at Matthew May and I think, I wish I could be like him. Just so confident. Nothing seems to faze him. There's me, all these are so insecure, all this self-doubt. There's him, just so confident. But over the years, I realised that he probably had as many doubts as me. He's just very good at hiding it. And I think that sort of comes to the crux of batting. You've got to con yourself, and you've got to con the opposition. So when you go out there, you've got all these doubts, but you've got to try and look as if you're super confident, and you've got this voice in your head telling you you're not going to score any runs, you're not very good, and you've got to con him that you actually are quite good and you can score runs. So I think there's a big element of batting where you're trying to put a mask on and con yourself and con the opposition.
I think so too. It's again that's what we see. They talk about this in cricket a lot. All the journalists like yourself and all the commentators you see, like Atherton, Nasser Sayed, they all talk about this at some point. The fact that the step up from, say, county level to test level is some of the mental aspect and dealing with all the pressure around that. And I think this not just the test players. I think there's a lot of players at club and amateur level that don't know how to turn the noise off and don't know how to speak. They're going with a million thoughts, therefore they're rushed playing their game. And if they just manage to turn the volume down, as Graham Gooch said, as like you said, in the middle, I think they could transform their quick 10s, 20s, 30s to be more consistent run scorers and score bigger runs if they learn to manage this side of the game.
I think the big problem with batting is it's a game of failure. I mean, different people will have different ideas of what success is. But for me, success is 100. Okay? So think how many times I was failing. And there's like horrendous, you get naught or you get fewer than 10. So I think one of the key things for young players is very quickly learning how to deal with that failure. Because as a youngster, if you're very good, you don't experience as much failure, do you? Because often you're so much better than people you're playing against. You succeed a lot. But as you get older and go up the levels, the amount of failure just starts to build up, and it's really hard to talk to players about that and trying to impress on them that this is actually normal. Like, okay, you've got 2 low scores on the trot. It could be a lot worse than that, and trying to deal with that and building up a resilience, basically, trying to get your mind right before the next game. Because as I said, there's always that voice in your head when you've had those low scores. There's a voice saying you're going to get another low score, you're going to snick off, you're going to be LBW early on, and it's really trying to silence that voice, and it's still there at the end of your career. I reckon at the end of my career, I'd sorted my game out. If I could get my mind right, there was a good chance I was going to score runs. But I found it really hard to get my mind right, and that's the challenge. Just making sure your mind is, because there's a lot of other things that could be going on. It's not just about cricket; it's about life as well. You could I don't know, you could have a row with your girlfriend or your wife, or your mum or dad could be ill. There's so many other things that could be going on. You could have a young baby and haven't slept and stuff. And people don't. When you're a professional cricketer, people don't know about that, and they don't see that when you're walking out to the bat. You might be absolutely shattered, and it's so hard to get. I'll admit, there were so many times when I went out to bat, I just couldn't get up for it. Because you play so much, there are going to be times when you just, and that's when I used to get really angry with myself. I couldn't get up for it, then I'd get out, and then that just sort of makes it worse because you think you didn't even give yourself the best possible chance. Going back to the mental, so much of this mental, it's trying to get the stuff right and then trying to get the mental stuff right.
So just to sum it up for those 2 sections of physical fitness and obviously mental, because I put the 2 of them together because they too.
Yeah, so do I. That's what I was trying to say at the start in terms of all my training. It was trying to get the physical side right, but it was really trying to help with the mental side as well in terms of getting that discipline and training for long periods of time. When I used to go for long runs, and during those runs, I'd be batting. I'd be thinking my way through an innings. That's something Alan Jones actually spoke to me about. He used to do that a lot. He used to go for long runs. You're on your own, and that's when you can really think about your batting and try and work out things. Nowadays, I can't run to a bad knee, but I cycle, and I write a lot of my articles when I'm cycling, if I'm on my own. Just time on your own, and you can, I don't know, I just think better when I'm out on my own, yeah. And the number of times when I've gone out on a bike ride and I've got no idea about a column for that day or the next day, by the time I've got home, I've written my column, basically.
Yep. I can totally relate that. For me, it's actually snowboarding, actually. I find snowboarding really, relaxing and cathartic. Like I'll happily go out on the mountain my whole day on my own. And like I said to Josh, some of the best business decisions we've made and transitions have made is come as a result of me snowboarding all day and coming back in the winter.
Back off the mountain. I've got a great idea.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah.
But it's same here. You know, in so many different sites. So just to sum up that area now. So if your advice in just a couple of what in one sentence would be for young cricketers to be fitter, but fitness to help improve their mental side of the game to scoring big runs, and with the mental side, learn to turn the volume down, but also have a consistent process for what you're doing. Is that a good summation of what you just said?
100%. Yeah. I mean, the fitness side of it, there's no excuse for not being fit. That's always what I say. And I still see so many professional cricketers who are not fit enough. The problem with cricket is you can actually get away with it. Like there are some roles where you don't necessarily need to be that fit. So say if you're like a middle order batter who whacks it and bowls spin, like how fit do you actually have to be? You don't need to be quick to the wickets because you can whack it out of the park and you only bowl off a couple of paces. So, no disrespect to those people who perform those roles, but you don't necessarily have to be that fit, do you? But if you're a fast bowler running in every day, you need to be fit, don't you? And if you're a batter like me who can't get off the square and needs to run, you need to be fit. So,
but if you want to score more runs,
you can get away with it. It's not like rugby or football, where you have to have these stringent fitness levels because if you're not meeting them, you're letting the team down. That's why it's a strange game, and the fact that we play so much, and it's difficult to manage fitness during the season. It's a complicated game in so many aspects. Cricket.
Yep. Exactly. A simple game played by idiots. That's what I always say to myself. And as I try to learn all these things. But that's a good segue. That's a good segue into the next section of the technical stuff. So before we go into head and hands, right, before we start talking about that, in terms of technique, what were your cues? What were your things that you were looking for technically as you were batting that became second nature? The things that you had to figure out that were your keys to you're going to be batting well if you're doing certain things. And we go into the other aspects in a bit, but what were the things that helped you perform at the highest level?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I've got the perfect answer. But so I've got this theory that most people's techniques are probably at their best and most pure when they're probably 16, 17. And then I think after that, when you're starting to adjust to bigger challenges, i.e., faster bowling, better spinners, that's when trigger movements come in and your game sort of looks a little bit different. I think I've said to you before, James, I'm not an advocate of coaching trigger movements for youngsters. I think it causes more harm than good, and I think it's dangerous to look at an international player and then try and copy that player when you're 12 because you're playing a very different game and the pace is much slower and you're growing. I was going on about the head position. Heads fall over a lot in youngsters, and if you've got a trigger movement, which is essentially moving across the crease, that's just going to exacerbate that problem. So,
I will use the example of this and other things in other walks of life. Beginners, obviously, most of the time need to stick to the rules. The pros can break the rules, and I think that's a big part of that. I think
that's what coaching's about, isn't it? I mean, you just take little things from other people. Yeah, but so I reckon when I was 16, my technique looked okay, and I was actually quite a good leg side player, and I didn't move that much, but flipping out by the end, I mean, I was moving so much, I made so many adjustments. I went from tapping my bat on the ground as a kid to holding it up like Graham Gooch. I mean, that's something else we can talk about. I mean, everybody now holds their bat up, whereas in my day, everybody tapped the bat, and then because of that, you almost had to take your hands back in and pick up, and now they hold it up and think they've already picked the bat up when they're probably just dropping their hands, and then there's no flow to the batting. But going back to tapping on the ground and getting some rhythm and flow into my batting, that was a big change for me. Going back to your thing about what are your cues and when do you know you're playing well. So this is a bit of a cliche, but if I was hitting one on the leg side and especially the on drive, I knew my head was in a good position. I was balanced. I used to topple over quite a lot to the offside, so trying to keep my head up. When I was really struggling, I used to actually think. Sorry, Josh, we're getting quite technical here, aren't we? Sorry.
No, go for it.
It's
No,
fine.
I learn something new every day.
He'll be a pro by the end of this as well. Like all the technique stuff he's learning, he'll be a pro.
Because I was falling over. I used to think every ball was going to be full and straight, so I get myself in a position to play that and then move from there. But yeah, it's head and hands as we talk about. If you can get your head forward at ball release and then move your head towards the ball, then your hands can go back, and then you can get a good flow in your batting.
So yeah, as a non-cricketer here, explain to me. Explain like I'm a 7-year-old. What do you mean when you say head and hands?
I mean, you've got to get your head. The head's the heaviest part of your body, isn't it? So wherever your head goes, the rest of your body goes. So there's an old saying in cricket now, get your foot to the pitch of the ball. But I actually think that's rubbish. I think if you get your head to the line of the ball, then the rest of the body will move, and your foot will move. So I always think that when the ball's bowled, you need your head slightly forward. So 60% forward, 40% on your back foot. And from there, you can either move forward or move back. But what you see is so many players, their head is sort of quite neutral between their feet, and then they find it difficult to move either forward or back. And because of that, their hands then won't be able to move back either. And then you end up being quite jabby. Basically, you need to try and get in as good a position as you can to play any stroke. And ideally, you want to be in a solid base and a good bat swing to be able to make good contact with the ball. Is that how I explained it to you, James? Is that?
Yeah, that's really good.
So Josh, when James, first time I saw him bat, I saw this guy's head was falling over to the offside, and therefore his hands weren't going anywhere, and he was like really crabby and jabby at the ball. So he's tried to get his head in a better position, and then as he moves, so his hands can go back and he can get a much better flow and he can hit the ball harder. I hope that in that time we've been working together, he's getting his head in a better position, his hands are moving more, and he's making better contact. That's all I'm ever trying to do with any batter, really.
It is. It's interesting just to talk about this now, because I think if you look at club level, take me in club cricket, okay? So playing in where I am in South East Wales divisions here, I could get away with that a lot of the time, if that makes sense, because the bowls aren't quick enough to challenge me here. They're not bowling 80 mile an hour. However, but I was running between the wickets well, I was scoring runs, but to take a step up again and to improve the game, you realise that when the ball gets quicker, if I haven't got these things dialed down here, and he was right, I was literally always I remember that, Steve, literally my head was, when we started to really dial it down, my head was going definitely to the offside, so I was like falling over a little bit more, and it was just the sound of the bat I thought was quite good. It wasn't the sound like a pro makes, and that's the best way to describe it.
And because of where your head was going, your hands couldn't go back, so they would just stay in there, and then you were pushing from there.
But the worst thing is now is, though, I can't unsee what I'm seeing with other cricketers that I'm around. And it is, it sounds derogatory, but I'm not meant to in that way, but it's that short, jabby stuff. They're standing like Harry Brook, right? They think they're standing like Harry Brook is, with their bat picked up, ready to go. But in fact, it's just an exaggerated jab forward, and that you see him chipping it to mid-off, mid-on, mid-wicket.
I mean, Harry Brook is not a great example for young kids. I mean, he's a magnificent player, but he manages to hold his hands up and they stay up. But it's actually really hard to do that, especially if you're not particularly strong. And this is another point. A lot of youngsters bat with bats which are probably too big and too heavy for them, so they'll never be able to do that. But yeah, he manages to keep his hands up, and therefore he has got a bat flow down. He slightly goes out just to get a little bit of momentum, and then he's able to come down on the ball. But most youngsters who start in that position will then drop their hands. So when the ball's bowled, their hands are probably by their body, and then they just jab from there.
Yep.
I'll go back to when I first came back into coaching, when I went to Monmouth School. I don't know, I think I might have told you this story, James, but after about 5 minutes in the nets with Andrew Jones, I turned to him and I said, "Do you realise what every single batter here is doing?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, every single batter is standing with a bat up. When I finished coaching 10 years ago, very few people were doing that, and now every single player is doing that. And that's the way the game has gone with T20 and the sort of baseball stance, which is okay, but people have got to realise that, say, the best players, like Joe Root starts with his hands up, they go down, and then they go back up. There is a movement back before he goes to hit the ball. You need a swing of the hands to hit the ball, same as a golf swing. You you don't stand there and hit like that, do you? Your hands need to go back and then have a nice swing into the ball. And there's so many players. Like, I think, James, since I've sort of impressed this on you, you said a lot of the players you play with, you'll see in their hands don't go back, and that's why they can't hit the ball square. Which is brilliant from your sort of coaching point of view. But I've tried to impress this on coaches I work with, and I still think a lot of coaches don't see that.
It's true,
and that's difficult. If you're not seeing it, you can't coach it.
It's a massive thing. There's two reasons, Steve, why I'm enjoying, but also wanting to work with you. Number one is that I'm a big believer that as a coach, if I'm not physically doing the thing that I'm coaching, I'm not in that learning environment, and I've got to be able to relate to the people I'm coaching. That's been the same with fitness under Josh. Like, Josh does all my coaching and training in fitness. I don't touch it, because if I touch it, I'm never going to be as good as what he will see it and be as impartial, right? And I also don't enjoy it because I like the feeling of being an athlete, going, hey, I got to do my training plan today, or this is what's in the training plan. So I love that aspect here. But the second is the learning the coaching side of things. Because again, you work with, not just yourself, other top coaches around who are working with the top class players. They see things differently, but also the players who play the game see things differently too. And that's what I'm seeing constantly, is this rigid style of things here. There's a great video on YouTube Shorts, of all things. I was watching some camera review, and it's popped up on my short YouTube, of Steve Smith. It's an image of him from behind, facing Mitchell Stark and what's the other seam bowler that opens the bowling? Hazelwood, right? Josh Hazelwood, yes. I said, no, it was Hazelwood. It was from the recent, one-day warm-up games and days before the warm-up games here. You watch Steve's bat flow. He's flowing back to come up and down. It's not rigid up here. It's got a wonderful flow to it, and it's you can see it so clearly, like Joe Root, in terms of how his bat flow comes down.
Steve Smith, people say he's got a really weird technique, but I will say just watch when the ball is released, the position he's in. So he's probably a little bit too open, but otherwise he's in a great position. His head's forward and his hands are back. So, you can forget about all the other stuff, which goes back to what I say about trigger movements. All you're ever doing with a trigger movement is you're trying to get ready to move again. Again, a lot of people think that once they've done the trigger movement, they don't really have to move again. That defeats the object, and then you end up not moving at all, don't you? And people often focus too much on the trigger move and then actually forget about the most important bit is after that. You need to be still when the ball's being bowled, and then you move from there. You don't necessarily have to move very far, but you need to move.
So, Steve, all the great players say that, as in, that's the commonality. Everyone's got their own style of spin on batting technique, but one thing that's a common thing with all the players and all the coaches is that keeping your head still at the moment of release, right? That's what everyone says.
Yeah, but it goes back to what Matthew Mino said about the best players being able to judge line of length. If your head is moving when time the ball's released, you won't be able to pick up line of length. I mean, I got to say, a moving camera takes blurred pictures. Okay, so if your eyes are moving when the ball's bowled, you're going to take a blurred picture. You're not going to pick up line of length. It's got to be still. But going back to the trigger movements, if you're a youngster facing 60 mile an hour bowling, you do not need a trigger movement because you will have time to move when the ball's bowled. Pros need to trigger because they're facing 90 mile an hour bowlers, and if you wait and try and make one big movement after that, you probably won't have enough time. You almost make it half the movement before the ball's bowled, so you only have to make another half when the ball's bowled, if that makes sense. Yeah. And it's the same if you're facing spin. We talk about a forward press. You've already gone halfway. So if you do have to play a forward defensive, you're only making a very small movement. If you have to make a big move and they've got catchers around the bat, there's a good chance you're just going to thud it into their hands. Whereas if you're making a small movement, you can get your hands out in front and play it nice and softly.
Like I said, as simple as it is, it's an inch wide, mile deep. I think that's probably the analogy you use this now in terms of how you're doing it. So if people's head is not still at point of release, they'll take blurry pictures. If they don't align it with the ball coming down and pick the line of the coordinate, they're always going to struggle. And if the hands don't go back, you're never going to present full face of the bat. And like I said, that's the biggest thing and compliment I can give you now is that the difference, I can feel the difference when I make contact full face of the bat now. I see the follow through like where he's like Ricky Ponte said it on one of the commentary things the other day, where you can see the full face of the bat afterwards. It's coming down, and it's, you know, it sounds a minor change, but it's not. It's a major change. Everything else has stayed roughly the same, but it's that moment and the timing coming down with it to make sure I get my head in the line. And it's interesting. After I sent you a message on Friday, I went about 2 hours hit on my own on Friday to try and drill it into me. And what I found was, you know, the slow starting side of things was my trigger word for me to start off earlier was head and shoulder. The head and shoulder allowed me to line up with the ball, but that dip in that shoulder a little bit allowed my hands to go back, and that's what suddenly got me into a better position. It wasn't an exaggerated shoulder dip. It was just an early thing, and then as I progressed to that session, it became more instinctive. And that was a thing for me I was working out with on Friday, which I'll see you tomorrow about anyway.
All I'm trying to do when I coach players, I want them to hit the ball better and more consistently. I'm not doing technical stuff just for the sake of technique, because that's the way it's always been done. I'm trying to get every player in a position so they can hit the ball better and more consistently. That's all, whether it's attacking or defending. Because basically, when you're batting, the middle of your bat is the bit that comes off best, isn't it? You want to hit the ball in the middle of the bat as much as you can, whether you're attacking or defending. And that's all I'm trying to do, is get people in better positions more consistently.
Simple game, played by idiots. That's all I got. Let's come back to that.
No, I mean, that is distilling it down into very simple terms. But that is all I'm trying to do. I don't see a player and pick up, you know, technical faults just for the sake of it. I hope I'm trying to make them make better contact. And that's all I ever talk. You know, if people are not timing the ball, you know, there's normally a reason for it, isn't it? And it normally comes back head and hands. But
hands to get head and hand, the theory, the same. But no, I encourage anybody listening, if they ever have a chance to go to the nets where they're watching pros practice, or they go to the game, yes, there's an element of they have the very best bats available to them, but it's the point of contact they're making the ball, the timing of the ball, the head and hands being in alignment allows that sweet crack sound off the bat. And if you have your eyes closed and you listen, you can sound a pro to a club amateur every day of the week by the sound it makes. And I think I encourage anybody listening to the podcast to do that, and it comes back to what Steve has been saying, and we constantly go drill into me as well, the idea of head and heads.
You should see, so I do some, you know, Sam Northeast asked me to do some stuff with him last winter, and I'd see him quite regularly. If you came and watched how well he hits the ball on the machine, I think you'd be amazed. His ball contact is like unbelievably good. He hits the ball so sweetly.
He did, and before my session on Friday, he was in there for 2 hours before me. And it was quite funny because I think he didn't score many runs this weekend, and apparently people said it was a very angry session, and the sound when I walked in was deafening. Just the crack off the barrel was deafening. So I don't know what happened. Yeah, that was Ed saying that anyway.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, Sam, he hits balls for a long period of time. I mean, yeah, it's normally 2 hours every session.
I'd like to say there's a slight difference in class between the two of us, but but I'll work towards that goal. Everything. But Steve, honestly, I'm appreciating the time and everything that got you to the podcast. I'm sure everyone's enjoying it here now. But if I was to ask you, looking back at your career, is there anything you'd have done differently in terms of prep, both physically, mentally, or technically, to allow you to score even more runs, knowing what you know now?
It's a good question. What? I wish I knew what I know now when I started. I think I wish I'd learn more quickly. I think everything I did learn, I was a bit slow on the uptake, if you know what I mean. So it took quite a while. No, I mean, I'm pretty proud of what I did in terms of, I'm not sure I was ever that talented. So with the talent that I had, I'm pretty proud of how things turned out. But yeah, it was a long process and took a lot of hard work, you know, whether that's physical or mental. Yeah, the game's so different now, and people have got so much more support. But I'm still not sure whether that's better or worse, because as we talked about earlier, you know, working things out for yourself can be a brilliant way of doing it. Sometimes you need some guidance, but so this is another one of the things when I'm coaching, I try and I hope this has come true when I've coached you, James. I try not to tell people too much. try not to be a dictator. I try and engineer a series of conversations so that the player makes those changes and makes those decisions himself. Because I always think if you think you're making the decisions, you're more likely to run with it. And that's something I try and do with young players. I try and say, what do you think about this? How do you think you're hitting the ball? What do you think? Sometimes you just have to come out with it and say that. But I always think, especially with better players, if you're trying to change something, you don't want to be going in and just telling them. You want to try and engineer a series of conversations so they actually think it's their idea.
That's exactly what we try and do with fitness.
They're more likely to run with it. That's what I try and do. Yeah.
No, it is. And it's like I said to you the other day, there's a book I recommend reading. I was just Googling it then. It is what I remember. It's called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And he goes around the world looking at the best sportsmen, musicians, artists, performers. I want to understand why are there these hotbeds of talent coming here? And do you know what he says? And the common things between them all was that all the coaches allow their players and performers to make mistakes. They have to learn on their own and go through that process, and they're there to guide them. But there's a lot more emphasis on making mistakes because they learn more from failure and having that hard-working, ingrained aspect to them to go over repeatedly and get comfortable with boredom is what he says all the time. So I highly recommend anyone who wants to learn a bit more about that. As Daniel Coyle, The Talent Code.
Comfortable with boredom is a great say. I mean, if you're going to be a batter, you've got to be very comfortable with boredom and just repetition. Because I remember you asked me, James, about that, didn't you? How would you go about fixing this? And I said, well, you just got to keep doing repetition. I hear a lot of coaches saying, we need to make it like fun and interesting for the batters, like challenges and stuff. And I'm not a big fan of that because, for me, hitting balls is fun and hitting them well consistently is real fun. And if you don't feel that way, then I don't think you're going to score many runs because that's all batting is, isn't it? Being out in the middle and hitting balls nicely for a long period of time. If you need some sort of extra stimulus, then I'd be worried about, whether you're actually going to make it as a batter. Comfortable with boredom. That's another one. I'll write that one down. I'll use that one as well.
He's getting all good stuff from you, James.
Exactly.
Today.
I tell you what, I'd like a quote in the Times, please, to me and Josh. Please reference us back. There we go, James and Josh.
That's what coaching is about, isn't it? I'd like to think I'm always still learning as a coach. Like even working with Sam North East this winter, that I reckon I've learned more than he's learned, which is, I think that's good, isn't it? That's, and then I could help someone like you maybe. But I've definitely learned a lot from him. And we have some really good conversations and, sometimes don't agree, have good debates and stuff.
That's what about, it's about finding your way in that.
I'm also mindful, I play, it's over 20 years since I played. So, the game has changed a lot. But I still think in terms of batting, if you can get the fundamentals right, the head and hands works for power hitting as much as it does a good defensive game. Even power hitting still, getting in good position. Going back to someone like Henry Hurl, I'd like to think I've been able to help him with power hitting, even though I've never done it. We never did that in our day. We used to get told off if we hit the ball out of the net in my day. Certainly not hitting in the stands and losing balls and stuff. So things have changed a bit since then.
Steve, one final question to you then. So what do you think modern batsmen can learn from your approach to the game, especially in an era when obviously T20 and is the fashionable thing and clearing the ropes? But what would your advice be to all the batsmen, both amateur, young kids coming up, and even the pros at this level? What can they learn from your approach to the game?
I just think getting those fundamentals right in terms of the head and the hands and making good contact and getting in good positions. I think that stands you in good stead, whatever format you want to play in. I always think if you can get that right, then all the fancy stuff, you can add that on. I mean, a lot of the kids these days, the ramps and the reverse ramps, sweeps and reverse sweeps, they just do that naturally. You almost don't have to teach them. If you just threw them a ball and said, do a reverse sweep, they can just do it. You don't need to go through the mechanics of it because they've watched it so much on TV. Watching is a great learning tool, isn't it? Yeah. Watch someone and copy them. I also remember Duncan Fletcher. I asked him, I think I was trying to coach my young lad how to bowl, which didn't work out because I was a terrible bowler. But I said to him, what would you do with a young kid and you were trying to teach them a bowl from scratch? And he just said, tell them to watch TV and copy. That's the best way to learn, isn't it?
Interesting. Hey, side note, like obviously Duncan Fletcher, obviously he was at Glamorgan during your time, wasn't he? Well, as a coach, what was, say, 3 things, I know we're wrapping up here, what were 3 things you learned from Duncan as a coach that helped influence you as a coach?
Tell you the first big thing with Duncan Fletcher was, you were talking about fitness. So he was the first coach who encouraged us to play touch rugby and football on the morning and after play. So previously, like, we'd have been scared of getting injured, but he really encouraged that as a way of keeping fit and keeping up people's competitiveness. He'd like pick sides, youngsters against oldies, and they'd be real competitive. I actually say, people ask me whether I miss playing cricket, and I say there's only 2 things I miss about playing professional cricket. One is scoring 100, because that is the best feeling ever, and 2 is playing touch rugby in the morning. So I think touch rugby is just such a great game, and I absolutely love those games. But he was the first coach who ever encouraged that. And I remember Glamorgan used to get letters from disgruntled members complaining about us doing that because people were going to get injured. And sure enough, I think Hugh Morris twisted his ankle once at Abergavenny playing touch rugby. But Fletch would always say the benefits of what we're doing here outweigh any negatives. So that was the first thing I learned from Fletch. So Fletch is he's the brains of cricket, I reckon. In terms of he spots things like I think I'm okay at spotting things with batters. He's on a totally different level. And I got to know him quite well because we used to travel a lot and we used to talk about these technical things a lot. But the big thing I learned from him about batting is be careful about when you actually talk to players about these things. His big thing is it's really easy to ruin a player, but it's really hard to improve a player. So you're better off not saying something than saying when you're not sure whether it's the right time. Duncan Fletcher turned up at Glamorgan. We had outdoor nets for 2 weeks. He barely said a word to anybody. He was just going round, observing. He didn't want to dive in at all. Matthew Maynard actually said he thought we'd signed a mute in Duncan Fletcher because he literally didn't say anything. But you see so many coaches who just want to dive in straight away when I reckon it takes a strong man or woman to actually sit back and just see what's going on and get to know the players and the people and then start to maybe filter in a few things. I said earlier, I'm not comfortable speaking in big groups, but I think cricket coaches talk too much in big groups. They all want to have their say, and they just end up talking too much. And I don't think players take a lot of that in. So, if I was going to give any advice to a budding coach, was try and say less if you can, but make sure when you do say something, it's spot on.
I like it. Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, James. Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've learnt a lot. As the non-cricketer of the group, I feel like I've learnt a lot.
I really enjoyed talking about those type of things. Yeah.
No, it's been really fantastic having you on. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening. Until next time.